So the talk is meant to be, it's a personal history, I would say. I'm not trying to give a factual account of the entire history of the conference, but as Pepe mentioned, I'm one of the lucky people who's been here every single year. And so this is kind of my personal reflection on the last 10 years of this. It's nicely billed as from an ATD veteran. The fact of the matter is, I'm just kind of addicted to this conference. So I'm more of an Agile Testing Days junkie than anything else. And I'll find all sorts of excuses to get invited, including suggesting I do a sort of 10-year retrospective talk, which was very kindly squeezed into this rather odd hour. So thank you for turning up when you could be out having beers with other people. So thank you. I wanted to just do a quick thing though. One of the things that you'll notice, I mean, the point of this talk is to give you some idea of why it's such a special event for so many people and why it's different to many other conferences, and indeed why it has such a high return rate. So, you know, you'll see people sort of hugging each other, lots of old friends meeting up, people who tend to only see each other when they come to this event once a year. You'll see lots of clusters of people at the bar and so forth, all good things, but there is a risk that that becomes a little bit cliquey for the people who, you know, are perhaps here for the first time or that haven't been part of the family so far. I'm going to just ask you to do something a little uncomfortable. All the people who are here for the very first time, this is your first Agile Testing Days, can I just ask you to stand up, please? So. Well, I'm glad I didn't have to say that. You're all very, very welcome, and I hope you will see some of the reasons why everyone else has sort of come back here, but a warm welcome to all of those people. I would have done the usual thing and got the other people to stand up and see how long you've been here. We would have ended up with the happy few that have been here all 10 years. But the sad twist of that story is that, yeah, Stefan Kempfer, who is one of the other 10-year veterans, can't be here. So I thought I'd skip that little bit, but Lisa, of course, is here. Gerard is another who's been here for 10 years. Okay, so how does this talk work? Well, firstly, this is a conference that's sort of grown and grown. So when it started in 2009, we were just a mere 150 people, and we weren't even in this venue. Last year, we sort of cracked the 700 mark. Jose, are you allowed to disclose how many people we have registered for?
I think 700.
There you go. So sort of up around there. Very good. Okay, so, and a big thank you to all the first timers for help creating that you know, continuing to break the record. So, what was the conference like in 2009 when it started? Well, we were just people getting drunk, basically, and nothing much has changed. So yeah, we were not at this venue. We were at another place in central Berlin, the Seminaris Campus Hotel, I think part of the Freie Universität. We had, as far as I was concerned, some fantastic keynotes there. So a number of my heroes were there. Lisa, Janet, Elizabeth Hendricks, and Tom Gill. These are all sort of pretty big names in the industry then, as they are now. So I was very excited to be there. And of course, I was lucky enough to have met Lisa before this, but that didn't stop me getting my fanboy pic with my hero over a very large stein of beer. Now, my talk was called Agile Test Management, Oxymoron. Now, the reality is I have faked that slide. To my great astonishment, Gerard presented me with an actual photocopy of my actual slide, because I can't even find this anywhere, but he's managed to find that. So thank you very much. Yeah, it was a pretty dull talk, though, so I'm not going to spend too long on it. there was one thing that I think that resonated, and so I've captured one moment from that talk. There's me. The picture's pretty bad, but no. What do you think? I still have good taste in shirts. Ever the well-dressed gentleman was me. I was too nervous to even open my eyes in those days, look at that. But yeah, I had this one phrase that seemed to resonate called respect the test. What the idea behind this was to use the test suites in your team as a means of being a valuable asset that brings everybody united around that. And the idea of respect the test is to say, let's treat the tests as something that's actually valuable to everybody, and let's treat them as something that's worthy of the care of the whole team. So I was quite proud when that sort of made it into one of Lisa's blogs after that. So that was, as I say, that was a pretty big deal for me. A year later, I was back, of course, along with many more people. We had 220 people. We had Linda Rising come. That was another great highlight for me. It was also interesting because it featured both Michael Bolton and Stuart Reed. So this was sort of at the height of a bit of a debate, if you like, over the issue of certification in the Agile testing space. And suffice to say, it was a pretty divided audience, but there was a little more on the anti-certification side than there was on the pro-certification side, which led to this interesting occurrence at the conference dinner, where I think it was originally proposed by Elizabeth Hendrickson to say, well, we should probably have our own statement. We should have something that allows us to say we don't need an external certification body. And so everyone started writing out their own statement of self-certification. And I haven't doctored this photo. Zeger van Hess does have it stuck to his forehead. And look, there's, once again, we're all sort of very urbane, sort of organized people. What does it say? Well, this is my copy. Production values. I've come along in the world. This is a photo of the actual card that I made on that night. So that still sits in my desk. It takes pride of place. And this was the statement. Yeah, we're a community of professionals. We're dedicated to our own continuing education and take responsibility for our careers. We support each other in learning and advancing our craft. We certify ourselves. And hundreds of these cards were written out that night. And everyone sort of was asked to keep them in their pocket as their own certificate of themselves. So I thought that was a pretty cool thing. Right, what did I say? What was my talk? Well, another long title. It was Hitting a Moving Target, Fixing Quality on Unfixed Scope. I can't remember what the central idea was in there, but there was one statement I made that seemed to resonate, which was that I still am, a big fan of acceptance test-driven development, specification by example, BDD, any flavor you want to select from that. And I found that there was a syndrome that people would use as an argument against putting an investment of time into doing ATDD properly. And the argument went something along the lines of, well, we could do all of that, but if we start doing all this testing and other work up front, then it's going to slow down development. And I'd end up having to sort of concede to these pointy-head bosses that, yes, okay, in some sense, doing your testing and quality analysis up front does slow down development, but it slows it down in a rather trivial way. It slows it down in the same way that stopping for passengers slows down the public bus. And how fast the bus goes isn't really the point of the issue. And so it's the same thing. If you want to measure your development speed by what is the rate at which you're churning out untested lines of code, well, that's fine, but your customers do not buy your software by the line. So slowing down the amount of untested code that you're producing probably isn't such a bad thing. Right, so that was the highlight of 2010. Oh, thank you, Lisa. Lisa loves that. She loved the previous one, and she loves this as well. Here we are. I'm scoring well here. Okay, so 2011, 300 people. So we're growing fast. Also, this was the first time that we moved our home to this very venue. So it was the first time here in the Dorrant. We had Jürgen Apollo was one of the keynote speakers. Gojko Adzic had been attending the previous two, but this was his first year to give a keynote, and it was sort of regarded by many as being somewhat overdue. I think a lot of people saw his talk the previous year and said, wow, that should have been a keynote. So Jose and the team responded to this and gave Gojko a keynote. But it was also most notable because this was the first year they introduced the MIATPP award, which stands for Most Influential Agile Testing Professional Person. I don't know who chose that name. That doesn't matter. But we had this sort of award-giving ceremony at, it was like a movie studio here in Potsdam. And I still can't believe this actually happened. But yeah, there's video to prove this. Lisa came out on a real bloody horse. And yeah, dressed in full regalia, and Gojko Adzic was given the award. We had the mayor, I think, of Potsdam turned up and gave it. It was all pretty full on. But what's most interesting about this story is that at the time this award was introduced, there really were only two people in the running. I mean, there were two sort of very famous and influential people. It was, of course, Lisa Crispin and Gojko. And as far as most people were concerned, that was probably only a vote between those two. Now, the actual numbers were not revealed, so as you were voting, you didn't know, what the results were so far. But it was revealed to me privately afterwards that Gojko won that vote by a single vote over Lisa. Furthermore, it was revealed Lisa voted for Gojko. So there you go. That's the kind of people that we have here. My talk, God, why do I choose such long names anyway? It was what testers and developers can learn from each other. And it contained this little scene. I had a bit of a theme of doing Pixar films as my kids were growing up. All I get to watch is Pixar movies. I don't get to watch real films. So I took this this phrase from Finding Nemo, and I hasten to point out that it wasn't so much about arrogant developers. I have met some developers whose arrogance might put Brucey and the other sharks to shame, but that's not what it was about. It was saying, thinking of testers as friends is useful for addressing this problem that sometimes comes up when people say, well, how many testers do I need in my Agile team? And, managers are usually waiting with pencil poised for my answer. And of course, there isn't a simple answer like that, because it's a little bit like asking the question, well, how many friends should I have? And expecting to be able to write down a number. Because the role that we play in a team is really defined by how much service are you giving? How useful are you to people? And I thought, well, what's a good analogy, or what's a good metric for this in terms of, how do you measure the value you bring to a team? Well, and I think there's a universal measure, which is that, a friend is somebody who would move your couch. I think that's pretty much, I think that internationalizes well. That's how you'd measure a friend. Your best friend, of course, is someone who'd help you move a dead body. For everything else, there's Facebook friends. So there we are. That was 2011. How am I going for time? Okay, I think we're through. Gosh, I've got a whole decade I've got to cover. So 2012, okay. Now, 2012 is a real turning point in this conference's history. A few of you, I suspect already, are kind of looking at what's going on with the unicorns and so forth. And 2012 was the year that this meme was born as far as unicorns at Agile Testing Days is concerned. So the opening keynote was by Scott Ambler, the guy behind sort of disciplined Agile delivery fame. And the actual unicorn reference came from some tweets from Goiko during that keynote, where, well, what did he say first? He said he took some exception to the frequency with which Scott dropped in the phrase, yes, but in the real world, this or that. And Goiko sort of felt this is kind of grating a little bit. So that generated a bit of chatter on the back channel. As I say, this is what goes on in keynotes. You can measure the audience reaction to things just by following the hashtag and seeing what's going on. And as I say, this seemed to get some reaction. So Goiko followed this, about an hour later or so with, okay, try and get a unicorn theme into your slides, and we'll make this a bit of a theme for the rest of the conference. And we all duly followed suit. So this was a shot from my talk, which featured an input-output matrix, and I thought, well, I'll use as an example that when you do or don't include unicorns in your talk. So my talk was called Exceptions, Assumptions, and Ambiguity: Finding the Truth Behind the Story. Although, and I have to say, this is a reasonably well-received talk, and I've done it a couple of times, but it almost always gets referred to by people simply as the Lola talk. And that's because it featured this particular song.
I met her in a club down in Old
So sing along if you feel like you've got beers in your hand.
champagne and it tastes like Coca-Cola, C-O-L-A Cola. She walked up to me.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, we can have fun playing songs later. But I focused on a particular stanza in this song, which I kind of like as my favorite, because I think it's just deliciously shows the power of ambiguity in writing and poetry, and shows what a strong place ambiguity has in our sort of difficult relationships with words and concepts. And I think this is particularly great writing. I'm not the world's most masculine man, but I know what I am, and I'm glad I'm a man. And so is Lola. And it kind of leaves you wondering, well, what can we actually deduce from this? How much can I really be certain about? And of course, uncertainty might be fine for song lyrics, but it's not good in software. We like to hammer things out. So what should we use? Well, specification by example, of course. Create a table, get the details in place, and start filling it out, Because if we attempt to proceed without getting to the bottom of this stuff, I mean, the code becomes difficult. You don't know where to put the brackets, basically. That's. So anyway, this is why we have testers, yes. Okay, 2013. This was a special year for me. The keynotes included the lovely Mary Gorman, Dan North, now someone I count as a personal friend, and my very first ever keynote at this event. So that was huge, yes. But some other significant things occurred in the evolution of the conference at that time. So some things that had been started out as sort of informal happenings became part of the program. So certain people liked the idea of being able to gather together and get questions answered by experts in a sort of informal setting, that became Lean Coffee in the mornings. Started as just literally a few brave souls who were still able to get up early given the excesses of the night before, but it's now become quite an institution, and now sort of fills the Fritz pub just down the hallway here. So yes, an enormously popular thing that's become part of the convention of the conference. And another thing was having the games night. So again, a number of people in the regulars here were all sort of games fans, and we noticed that seemed to be a common pattern amongst testers, as there's a lot of game players, because it's very good for exercising the tester's mind. So games night became a thing as well. We also started to see a little bit of the burgeoning musical talents of some of the people. So some talented people would start to get out a guitar and have jam sessions in the bar and that sort of thing. But we will develop that side of the story in a little bit. I gave a talk called Visualizing Quality. So this was my keynote. This was my big moment. I've picked one element from this talk, which was a bit of fun. We're going to need to do a little bit quickly in the interest of time here, but it was my big audience participation moment in the talk. And it refers to this problem or this challenge that we need to overcome, that as human beings, we drastically prioritize what we see compared to any other senses. And in particular, we believe what we see more than we believe what we hear, to such an extent that we will hear what we see rather than what we're actually hearing. And this is demonstrated by an interesting little experiment. So I gathered together a boy band from Lady Gaga's lesser-known identical triplets. They are Baron Barbar, who just says ba 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 ba. There's Dr. Dada, who says, you guessed it, da 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 da. And there's Viscount Vava, who says va 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 va. And what you're going to hear is them singing these lyrics in turn. Okay, so watch very closely, and you should be able to work out who is who, because otherwise they look exactly the same. So otherwise you wouldn't know. So let's see who's up first. The band is called the McGurk Effect, by the way. Here it comes.
Ba 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 ba.
Baron Barbar.
Ba
Right?
ba 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 ba.
Okay, who's next?
Ba 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 ba.
Dr. Dada,
Ba 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 ba.
which only leaves
Ba
Viscount
ba
Vava.
ba 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 ba. Ba 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 ba.
But what's it like when they all sing together?
Ba 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 ba. Ba ba ba
By changing
ba
who you look at.
ba ba. Ba 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 ba
Weird, right?
ba ba.
Close your
Ba
eyes.
ba 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 ba.
So, you are only ever hearing the same sound. The sound did not change anywhere during that clip. Ba, ba, ba was all you heard. But you could see the lips of the singers going ba, ba. You know that must make a v sound, because you see the bottom lip go under the teeth. You know with that duh, duh. You can see the tongue going, making a da sound, duh, duh. You are convinced you can hear da. You're convinced you can hear va. But you're not, you're only ever hearing ba, and the only way to convince yourself of that is to close your eyes and hear what you're actually hearing. So that was the McGurk effect, and the lesson is always be aware of a potential conflict between the things that we show and the things that we say, okay? Because your receivers, your recipients, will always believe what they see, and they're not going to listen to what you actually say. Okay, 2014, we had 460 people. The number of speakers is growing all the time. We had some people who might otherwise only be known by their Twitter handles. So we had Fochain Sensei, Bob Marshall. We had Evil Tester, Alan Richardson. And we had, it's his real name, Joe Justice. I'm sure he's part of the, a superhero league of some kind, but no, he's a real guy. Yes. But what was interesting too is that I was very kindly invited back for another keynote, but my keynote took place at the same time as Joe Justice shipped in a frigging car. There was a car being built in the lobby while I was trying to get an audience for my keynote. And yeah, so sure enough, this is people literally assembling a racing car in the lobby out there amongst the unicorns. That was pretty wild. If that wasn't wild enough, it was also the year of the Testing World Cup. And the victorious team were from Brazil. I don't know how much that was known in advance, because I suspect getting the Brazilian dancing team in, that probably required a bit of effort. So I'm not saying it was a foregone conclusion, but yeah, there was a full-on Brazilian, drummers and dancers, and it was all a bit of a mental night. Okay, so what was my keynote? It was the pillars of Agile testing. Well, it was another moment of pride. Everything seems to be connected to Lisa Crispin somehow in my career. But, it was around this time that the second edition, that is more Agile testing, was released, and I was very proud to have a chapter included on my model of the pillars of testing in that book. What's the pillars? Well, it's essentially saying there's 4 things that we need to focus on in terms of our Agile testing strategy. We should be encouraging getting stronger evidence, better test cases, greater test coverage, and faster feedback from our tests. All well and good, but what do you need to put in place to be able to make those things a success? Well, you need collaborative team structures, you need the appropriate skills and capabilities, and you need strong technical foundations. So I put all those things into a sort of visual model known as the pillars of testing, or this temple of testing, that sort of shows this relationship, shows this idea of that I've been held for a long time, that the product of testing is confidence. Confidence is a product or a combination of safety and courage. And we looked at all of the bits and pieces that you need to have in place in order to hold those pillars with any kind of strength. So, but too much detail to go into now. You should go out and buy the book and read the details there. See, I do help you back again there. Okay, 2015. What was going on here? Of course, it was Dr. Black. So Sue Black is well known for her role in saving Bletchley Park, the sort of research centre in Britain that was a significant influence in shortening World War II. It was also the year that I was very proud. My colleagues Tom Roden and Ben Williams did a keynote which included a somewhat infamous voiced over Darth Vader video. It wasn't the first. They'd done a similar one the previous year featuring a Christmas carol. There's rumors there might be other videos like these in the making, but I wouldn't want to steal any of Tom and Ben's thunder. It was also the year that the testing lab had been going for some time. This was already quite established. James Lindsay and Bart Mack are responsible for that every year. But what I thought was quite cool this year was that they had this idea to create a so-called Rube Goldberg machine, which is this big, elaborate, interconnected device that didn't do anything particularly special, but just was interesting for its intricacy. And so over the course of the conference, people would come along and build another element of the Rube Goldberg machine, and the finale was to have it all connect up, and it would sort of connect to the internet-aware device would switch on a PowerPoint, which would turn on the fan, which would turn this thing, and we would see. It was really quite a work of genius. The other thing that worth note here, this is by, I'm afraid it didn't come out very well, but he had a 3D printer, and that's a little unicorn 3D printed on site. Yeah. Oh yeah, exactly, for a charm bracelet. Yeah, so those are very popular, and that was a highlight for me. I gave a tutorial that year on testable user stories. What was the main message here? Well, it was really about telling people the difference between a story and a specification, and similar relationships between things that we should keep for the long term versus those that are just temporary and are simply a means to an end. So I'll zoom in on here because this is really the important bit. All of these things on the left are essentially short-lived artifacts. These are all things that once they've served their purpose, you can and should get rid of them, but each one has a close relationship to something on the right-hand side that is valuable and long-lived and therefore should be preserved. So a story is essentially an instruction to make a change, or a plan or a promise to make a change. In the specification, we hold the details of the effect or the desired effect of that change. So making the change is just a temporary one-off thing, but the effect of the change, of course, remains. So being able to document the things about the behavior is quite important to preserve, but we don't particularly care which sprint this particular story got implemented in that. So we don't want to keep some great big hierarchy of documentation that's all release 1, sprint 3, story 19, that sort of thing. Don't do that. Similarly, your acceptance criteria are a one-off checklist, but you'll quite often prove your acceptance criteria by virtue of acceptance tests, and those are the things that are valuable and should be preserved because we want those kept as regression tests. Similarly, the cards or the JIRA tickets, those are things that are useful for planning but then have a limited life thereafter. That's different to living documentation. That needs to be kept. You should be putting that in a wiki or something like that. So don't try to use JIRA as your documentation platform. Okay, so that was that lesson. 2016, okay, well, we're getting near the end here. Okay, so we had Melissa Perry gave one of the keynotes. Goiko gave a return after a little absence. Diana Larson was also there. But look, those of you who noticed, I've reminded you of the little history up the top there. All these people died in 2016. It was carnage. It was a terrible year for the music and entertainment industry. All those people, but one got away. Anyway, I don't do politics in my talks, do I? Of course not. Of course not. There'd been, I mentioned, a sort of informal tradition of a bit of late night jamming and musicianship at the bar over a few beers. And now, this was the year that became formalized into an actual thing on the program. And so the inimitable Daniel Maslin, whose alter ego is Mephisto, ran the so-called beer note of the night for the Agile Cabaret. And feelings mutual, Dan, feelings mutual. So many of the talented people that I've photographed here, you'll probably have the pleasure of seeing if you go and attend the cabaret this year. It was also the year that Eddie and Bram brewed up some very special Agile Testing Days beer. So that was hugely popular, as I remember, yes. And Eddie's here with us in the front row, yes. So we greatly appreciate that. I still got my commemorative bottle in my study. My talk was called Mind Your Language, Unintentional Bias, Social Identity, and Teamwork. Now, what did I say? Oh, yes. I challenged the audience to say, what do we think are the characteristics of a good tester? What are the things, if you think about what makes good testers great, how would you describe them? What are the characteristics? So again, I won't make you go through that exercise, but we heard the sorts of phrases that appear on some of these lists. So there was lots of references to being passionate, lots of references to being curious, lots of references to having good attention to detail or having good analytical and critical thinking skills. So I asked people to say, okay, well, given these sets that I looked up on the internet, which do you think sort of most resonates with your own thoughts on what makes a good tester? And so we got people to vote on each of them. And then I said, oh, okay, well, the trick is that not all of these are actually about testers. Can you spot which one is not about testers. And so we went around. I'll do the big reveal. None of them were about testers. These were just describing traits of copy editors, business analysts, shock horror, developers, and leaders. So it sort of makes you think, well, maybe the things that we tend to hold dear as the things that we're convinced are qualities of our own tribe, our own type, our own people, maybe they're just good characteristics of team members. Maybe they're just the sorts of things that you need to sort of do a good job in whatever field, if you're in the so-called intellectual industry. So that was the starting point. The next thing was to say, okay, what's the consequence of this? And we sort of talked a bit about sort of social identity theory, that is the idea of in-groups and out-groups. And so I posed the question, is it a problem to self-identify as a tester and to be proud of being a tester? Well, no, of course not. That's kind of why you come to conferences like this and why you'll have a good time and why you'll be inspired by meeting all the smart people that you will. That's fine, continue to do that. Where it gets a bit of a problem is that in sort of basking in the glory of how good it is to be amongst your sort of, great fellow testers, we can make this mistake. We can start to assume that because I see these qualities in the testers around me, I start to sort of associate that with my in-group and assume my out-group, developers, business analysts, project managers, I assume those groups don't have those qualities. And that's a logical fallacy. So the real sort of dead end here, or the real sort of problem point, is that if we then say that, because those people can't be trusted with testing, I'll sort of treat testing and the kudos, if you like, the resources that go with that, as if it's something limited that we have to protect or that we have to fight over, because we don't want the enemy getting those things. We don't want other people getting credit for the things that we should get credit for. So I think that's a dangerous thing. And so my takeaway was that I don't want people to limit the possibility for having other team members contribute meaningfully to testing. And so just being careful about the way we announce our responsibility or our relationship to testing is what I want people to take some care over. And hence it was called Mind Your Language. All right, well, we're nearing the final straight here. 2017. We had the lovely Ash Coleman, we had Angie Jones, we had Roya Mahbub and the amazing, amazing Afghan girls robotics team. When these girls sort of did their keynote, I'm sure I wasn't the only one that was reduced to floods of tears, sort of hearing this incredibly emotional story about the kind of challenges and battles that these girls have faced simply to pursue their desire to exercise their great intelligence in technology. So you may recall I started my Agile testing career sort of getting a fanboy selfie with a talented and influential woman in tech. 10 years later, I'm still doing the same thing. I'm getting my fanboy selfie with inspiring women in tech. So my talk was, I finally got the hang of shorter talk titles. Yeah. Telling better stories was all it was called. It was called that because I have a particular dislike of a certain template that's common in Agile. I'm sure you know it. It sounds a bit like as a, I want, so that. And I don't like people sort of slavishly using this because I think it just leads to some pretty stupid stories. And so, yeah. So, yeah. I'm sure everyone's read that story at one point. I want to be locked out after the incorrect password attempts, yeah. And I'm grateful to Nat Price for sending this last one in. Said that his product owner said, there is only one story, yeah. But I don't like to just get up and complain about stuff. I like to propose an alternative. So my alternative suggestion was to try, if you still insist on using a structure or a template, and I'm giving you permission not to use any template at all, just write something sensible and meaningful. But if you do like a template to hang on to, maybe try this one. Maybe put the why first and start with in order to, and describe an outcome that you're improving for somebody, which should be along the lines of making something better that they already have. A good starting point is always saving somebody some time, but it might also be about giving them more confidence or giving greater accuracy, or indeed even giving somebody more fun. It all depends on the context of your product. Make the who part of your story meaningful and specific. Not all your users want all your stories equally, so try to be clear about who really does benefit from this story. The we will, or the what part of the story should be about describing the actual behavior of your product. Don't describe inputs, don't describe implementation details, describe observable behavior of your product as outputs. And if it's useful, try this extra phase. Try putting a whereas currently to describe how does the proposal that I put in place differ from what the functionality is today. This I find useful for getting people to understand what is the actual scope of the or the significance of the change that's being proposed. Okay, it's 2018, and so when this went to print, I didn't know how many people there are, but we've just heard that we've got 720 odd people, so that's pretty fantastic. Some of the keynote speakers are great people that we're seeing keynote for the first time. So Trish Koo, Jeff Susna, Amory Sharrett is here, Faiza Yusuf, Jita has been a regular, but she's keynoting. These are all going to be awesome. My talk, well, you've just seen it, so that's... The highlights, of course, that's up to you. It's for you to create the highlights of this conference. I hope you are going to have a fantastic conference. Thanks very much.